Bonjour, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to today's virtual panel discussion. My name is Mehrdad Hariri. I'm the CEO and President of Canadian Science Policy Centre. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's panel. I'm going to start off with acknowledging the land that I'm talking to you from the town of Newmarket, Ontario, which is located on the international territories of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe people, and the treaty land of the Williams Treaties, First Nations, and other Indigenous peoples whose presence here continues to this day. We recognize the enduring presence and resilience of Indigenous peoples across Canada and are grateful for the opportunity to gather and share knowledge on these lands. I invite our attendees to share their own land acknowledgement if they want to. Before we dive into our discussion today, one important and special housekeeping note that we have an exciting upgrade regarding the accessibility. Today, we are testing simultaneous interpretation through Word app right here in Zoom. So in order to use that for captions, you should see an option on your screen at the bottom of the Zoom screen to enable Word app through show captions. You can select your preferred language to see the live transcript of our conversation. For audio, we will add a link, in the chat. I think my colleagues have added right now, if I'm not mistaken. So you can click on that and listen to the audio of your preferred language. But if you are doing so, you must mute the Zoom window to avoid hearing the two voices at the same time. For today's panel, thank you very much once again for joining to today's panel discussion that is titled AI for All, Balancing Innovation, Sovereignty, and Trust. This event, by the way, is part of the CSPC's series of virtual panel discussions that start today and will continue over the course of next few weeks. And please check our event page on the website to see what other panels will be presented. The Government of Canada, as you know, unveiled a long-anticipated AI strategy called AI for All strategy. This outlines an ambitious vision for Canada's AI future. Throughout these panel series, CSPC aims to bring diverse perspectives from leaders from government, industry, academia, and civil society to discuss the opportunities, challenges, and policy choices embedded within this strategy. We want to explore not only how Canada can remain a global AI leader, but also how we can ensure that AI development and deployment align with Canadian values. These questions have become more timely, as I said, because of the Canada's AI strategy release. Today's discussion focuses on a fundamental question: how do we balance innovation, sovereignty, and trust? And how do we build the infrastructure, talent needed to compete in the global stage today while protecting Canadian interests? And how do we encourage the adoption and economic growth while ensuring accountability and public confidence? And how do we prepare Canadians to participate in and benefit from an AI-enabled future? I want to thank you all once again for participating at this event. There will be Q&A period of time, but it is at this point my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our moderator today, Dr. Charmaine Dean, who, by the way, needs no introduction from me. Dr. Dean is one of Canada's most respected academic leaders. Throughout her distinguished career, she has made significant contributions to research, innovation, data science, and higher education leadership. Her experience at the intersection of research excellence, innovation policy, and talent development makes her exceptionally well positioned to guide today's discussion. And we are happy to have her with us. Dr. Dean, the virtual floor is yours, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mehrdad, and thank you also to the CSPC team for pulling this together. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's virtual panel, AI for All, Balancing Innovation, Sovereignty, and Trust. This is a really crucial juncture for Canada's scientific and economic trajectory. So the federal government has a newly released AI for All National AI Strategy. This represents a multi-billion-dollar roadmap, and it's intended to solidify Canada's position as a global AI powerhouse. There are so many fronts to it: building our domestic computing infrastructure, mobilizing AI for public sector transformation. The ambitions laid out against the 6 pillars are truly immense. As anyone in industry or in research or in the policy space will tell you, strategy needs really hard work towards successful implementation. And a strategy as big as this is one that will require some substantial effort. We're going to dissect the roadmap today. But even as we do that, we're going to let's talk about some very real systemic tensions that Canada has to navigate. And the first one at the top of the list is the trust deficit. So Canada currently ranks 42nd out of 47 countries in public trust of AI systems. A big question is, can we close this gap through updated privacy frameworks, or do we require more centralized guardrails? The second is the scaling and talent gap. We are world-class at generating foundational AI research, nurturing top-tier graduate talent. How do we scale those breakthroughs into global commercial champions right here at home and before they are acquired by foreign capital? Do our universities have the sovereign compute capacity to keep our best minds from leaving? The last piece, which is really important, is the adoption mandate. The strategy sets an aggressive target to skyrocket business and public sector AI adoption from currently 12% to 60% over the next decade. Driving this cross-sectoral deployment will require a massive evolution in workforce readiness, domestic commercialization, and computing infrastructure. How we balance these priorities will define Canada's digital future. I have a terrific panel list here who will help us unpack some of the questions at heart. It's an extraordinary cross-sectoral lineup of leaders who sit at the very heart of this ecosystem. And I'll note that the bios for our panelists are in the chat line through the link that's provided in the chat line, and that is a link to the description of the session itself, but it also has information related to each of the panelists. Very honored to have Mark Shan with us. Mark Shan is the Associate Deputy Minister at Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. Thank you, Mark, for joining us.
Thanks so much, Jermaine.
We also have Julian Bio. Julian is the CEO of Scale AI. Julian, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Wyatt Tessari Lallier. Thank you, Wyatt, for being here. Wyatt is the founder and executive director of Artificial Intelligence Governance and Safety Canada.
Thanks for having me.
Melissa Emraidi Kechichian. Melissa is Research and Advocacy Fellow at the Center for AI and Digital Policy. Melissa, terrific to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
And Dona Prikop. Dona, thank you very much for coming. Associate Professor at McGill. She's also the head of DeepMind Montreal. Thank you, Dona.
A pleasure to be here.
So the format today is really designed to be a conversation. We're going to begin by inviting our panelists for some opening remarks. and likely focus on their immediate sector-specific reflections on the strengths and gaps of the strategy. And then following that, we're going to dive into a moderated discussion. We're going to make sure to save 15 minutes at the end for the audience questions. So please pay attention to the Q&A and feel free to put questions into that channel even as we go through the panelists' remarks and questions, and then I'll turn to them at the end. So to set the baseline, it's only fitting that we start with the government's vision. So Mark, the floor is yours to lead us off with opening remarks.
Thanks so much, Charmaine, and huge thanks to you and to the Canadian Science Policy Conference for the invitation to be able to participate with you here today. And Canada's vision for the new AI strategy is AI for all. At its core, AI for all is grounded in the principle that the benefits of artificial intelligence must be shared widely, ensuring that workers, businesses, and communities across Canada can access and benefit from this transformation, rather than concentrating advantage in the hands of a few. AI must work for all Canadians, not the other way around. It must be put to work to grow the nation's prosperity, promote Canadian culture, and strengthen communities. The new AI strategy recognizes both the enormous opportunities and the real concerns posed by AI, including job security, sustainability, privacy, sovereignty, and trust, all of which will remain central to ongoing development and governance. Canada will advance a responsible, safe, and sovereign AI industry, committed to protecting privacy, enhancing trust, and ensuring that AI adoption is guided by Canadian values and priorities. It is trust that makes adoption possible. Opportunity and sovereignty ensure adoption creates benefits for Canadians now and into the future. That's why, to realize this vision, the strategy sets out 6 key pillars. 1, protecting Canadians and safeguarding our democracy. AI will only deliver on its promise if Canadians trust it. That requires modern privacy and online safety laws, strong national AI safety capabilities, and secure government systems. 2, empowering Canadians. Canada must become a skills nation, where AI creates good jobs for Canadians by giving access to AI training and education for all Canadians, and by representing and including Canadian voices, languages, and culture. 3, powering shared prosperity. The gains of AI will come from putting it to work across the Canadian economy and developing pro-worker industrial AI technologies. AI for all will support accelerated adoption among SMEs and transform our public service delivery to deliver better services to Canadians. 4, building the Canadian Sovereign AI Foundation. AI for all will support the building of sovereign compute infrastructure at scale, resilient, sustainable, and under Canadian governance, growing Canada's exceptional AI researchers and talent pool, and ensuring we have the foundation of ingenuity that can propel us into this important era. 5, scaling Canadian champions. To scale great AI companies in Canada, AI for all will unlock growth capital and leverage government as a strategic anchored customer. And finally, 6, building trusted partnerships and global alliances. Canada will work with a variety of trusted partners to align standards, co-invest in innovation, and help Canadian companies access global markets, all while shaping an AI ecosystem anchored in our democratic values. And so that's the goal, AI for all, and I think we've set out the tools and the mechanisms to get there, but very much looking forward to the conversation today on much of the detail.
Thank you, Mark. Julian, may I turn to you?
Sure, not so easy to speak after Mark, but I will try to give my remarks. Obviously, we are very happy to see this strategy, meaning we're very happy to have a Minister of AI in this country. As Scale AI, we exist since 2019. We always advocated to support AI for industry. So obviously having a minister, then a strategy, a renewed strategy was, of course, great news. We like the word trust, adoption, sovereignty, champions, global scale. They are all themes that are very dear to our heart. We contributed to the strategy. There are themes we have supported, obviously, across all the work we've done. On my side, perhaps just to give a different perspective we are representing part of the industry, at least. We are representing adopters of AI and representing part of the service and product industry of AI, building solutions for adopters. And their feedback on the strategy is perhaps slightly different, meaning for adopters, strategy is great. I mean, there's a lot of money for adoption, as Mark said. There's $500 million on the BDC side. There's $500 million on the RDA side. So that's great for adoption. On the industry of service, we consider that a strategy should not be final in the sense that it's a bit hard to understand where are the support and how can be the support for the industry. We know the mission, the AI mission, could be some of it, but for sure, as I think you said, Mrs. Chairman, is implementation, as consultant says, implementation kills strategy at breakfast, or it's strategy at breakfast. And that's exactly what we need to see now, is how this strategy will be implemented so that the AI industry, the 200 or more service and product providers in this country who develop AI solution, can find a way to have access to local markets and really grow the business.
Thank you, Julian. A lot of focus on trust in both the remarks so far. Wyatt, turn to you.
Yes. So our perspective is that the strategy is an important first step, especially in dealing with the first generations of AI. But as mentioned by the panelists, the hard work remains, especially when it comes to looking at what's next. So because AI is a moving target, I'll structure my remarks according to the generations of AI that we've seen so far. So in the 2010s, we saw single-purpose systems, your Netflix recommenders, Siri voice recognizers, banks using AI to decide who gets a mortgage or not. And the impacts we're seeing there were things like privacy and bias. We're happy to see there is a privacy bill here. It's already been introduced to Parliament. There are some issues with the bill, especially in terms of the oversight, but some steps in the right direction. And on the bias side, it doesn't do anything. In theory, human rights law and the charter should protect people, but there's still a big gap in terms of it's hard for people to even know they're being victimized by bias, because often they'll just hear whether they get the mortgage or not. They won't necessarily know why. The 2020s obviously saw ChatGPT in the generative AI era. That's where you saw all the issues with deepfakes and with election issues. This is, I guess, where the strategy deals most with in terms of the impacts. So we've already seen C16 on criminalizing deepfakes, and C25, the Election Act, being strengthened, which was very good. Bill C34, very glad to see a section there on service chatbots, a step in the right direction. We'll see how it gets implemented. We'll see how much oversight and enforcement there is. But generally be good. The question we have on that piece really is, how fast will the other bills, C34 and 336, be implemented? Because obviously AI is moving very, very fast. And will these bills be future-proof in the sense that if it takes 2 to 3 years for them to be fully implemented, will they be ready for the AI of 2 or 3 years from now? And this is where the strategy starts to sputter a little bit in our mind. Right now in 2026, we've already seen this new era of agentic AI, where AI agents are running products from end to end. You're no longer chatting with the chatbot, getting an answer. You're giving the goals to an AI agent, sending it off to work for a few days, and it comes back and it gives you a full-on software project. So that's been very huge opportunities, obviously, in terms of the technology, in terms of economic growth. But also, we've seen with Mythos major cybersecurity issues. If systems can plan, orchestrate, and run full-on cyber attack campaigns, that's a whole new layer of national security and sovereignty we need to be worrying about. And there wasn't very much in the strategy other than increasing in budget for the KZ, which was good. We'll see how that gets spent. There was a line there about working with frontier AI companies to strengthen our infrastructure. A lot of heavy lifting is being done on that line. We'll see how it gets implemented. The last piece, which is where AI is headed, obviously you have Google DeepMind, OpenAI, Anthropic. Their explicit goal is to build smarter than human systems. There again could be a huge opportunity for Canada, but there's the rest of the issues around jobs, around democracy, around relationships, around go down the list of every aspect of human life is going to be impacted by smarter than human systems, superintelligence. And the fact that the strategy doesn't bring itself to even mention what the leading companies are building and could be building in the next 2, 3, or 5 years suggests that this is a very important first step of a strategy, but it's not a complete package.
Thank you, Wyatt. Wyatt, we're going to get back to Mark about some of these questions that you've posed when we come to discuss trust and governance. So, terrific opening remarks, Wyatt. Melissa?
Overall, I think it's definitely a step forward, especially in terms of finally regulating AI before it does more damages, and also modernizing our privacy laws to protect our personal data. The direction of the strategy is crystal clear to me, but the how, especially in terms of operationalization, remains kind of a question mark beyond federal investments in AI literacy, SMEs and research, global alliances with other countries, for instance, et cetera, et cetera. As Mark mentioned, one of the pillars is shared prosperity, AI for all. But at the same time, the strategy puts a lot of trust actually, in the private sector to create jobs, which would create financial opportunities for Canadians. However, historically, private companies tend to concentrate money and power within the hands of a few tech leaders. And if we look at the United States and Silicon Valley, it led to what are now called the tech oligarchs, who then become domestic threats to democracy. And I don't think that's a road we want to take. But fortunately, it is emphasized in that strategy that it is dynamic and will evolve with time, which tells us that there will be several opportunities for the public, the private sector, researchers, civil society, activists to provide feedback to make this strategy beneficial for all. And speaking of, another accompanying aspect that I think we all obviously noticed is the clear move away from American providers, whether it be cloud or infrastructure, not to be fully independent, which is impossible, but at least not to be mainly dependent on the US. So these alliances with European countries like Germany, like France, are a very positive step forward to actually safeguard our democratic rights in technology. And I also think that because the EU is so advanced in terms of regulation of AI and data privacy with the EU AI Act, with the GDPR, with the TSA, it's also going to help us create our own Canadian regulatory framework sooner and following the highest standards. However, I also saw a massive red flag that I identified that was pushing AI in healthcare and moving towards sharing patients' data with entrepreneurs for innovation. And for me, sharing sensitive data to the private sector to innovate is a big no. And on top of that, minorities and female patients have systematically been excluded from the data. And at the end, AI systems in healthcare have automated discrimination. And even though I do believe that, like it was stated in the strategy, that highly specialized AI systems, not one size fits all, can actually improve efficiency, there are issues that are deeper that cannot be solved with AI. For instance, AI in the emergency rooms, that was an example given, is not going to cut it when provinces like Ontario have been cutting on their preventative healthcare centers. And also there is consistent understaffing of healthcare facilities all across the country. So in the strategy, there is this example that says the AI system can actually alert a nurse if a patient's health deteriorates, which in theory is great. But if you only have one nurse per floor and one doctor per unit, this is unfortunately not going to solve the issue. And the same massive amount of money could be used to create scholarships, for instance, to train more healthcare practitioners and hire more staff. And going back to regulation, that will be my last point. At the end of the day, it's a strategy for a massive project to be deployed across provinces. And it will definitely require standards to operationalize this vision of AI for all. Otherwise, this goal won't be reached simply because responsible or accountable AI that was mentioned doesn't mean the same depending on who you are. If you're a for-profit company, a public institution, or an indigenous leader, you're not going to define responsible or accountable the same way. So it's also urgent to put AI regulations in place before giving money, mass investing in SMEs. And also, it is critical to invest in auditing to make sure that this mass adoption of AI that is frankly kind of being forced on Canadians for long-term economic and geopolitical goals is actually safe and trustworthy and beneficial. And that will also ensure that we're moving forward inclusively.
Melissa, those are terrific remarks. I'm going to come back to you a little bit later on when we get into the trust section about the emphasis on modernizing the privacy and safety parameters. And you talked about health, so it'd be terrific if near the end, when we talk about mission-driven AI and public services, if you return to some of your comments that you made about health, and then perhaps there's an opportunity for you to dive a little bit deeper in there. And it's not just the bias, I would say. There's also deliberate attempts to infuse misinformation into systems which, as we know, led to things like foreign interference, etc. So just amplify those effects when you talk about AI-driven systems. Thank you, Melissa. Terrific opening remarks. And our final panelist, Doina.
Yes, thank you very much. It's been really great actually to see the strategy come out. I think from the point of view of the academic AI community, this has been a breath of fresh air because both the continued commitment towards talent, towards the AI chairs, for example, but also new commitment towards compute infrastructure, which is a very, very important piece of having actually sovereign AI in Canada. This is a place where we really need help in terms of being at the cutting edge. And also the new sort of highlighted collaborations that are broader internationally are very important for us. And we do have also a chance, I think, to put a Canadian imprint on AI and actually bring it into the context of the broader science and health research in Canada, which is foundationally really strong and can benefit from AI methodology to advance things like AI for material discovery, for example, AI for biology, and so on. So I think we do have a very unique opportunity now also with the extra funding for the AI chairs, with new chairs, to bring in specialists that are at the intersection of fields that can push not just fundamental AI research, but interdisciplinary research that can help us figure out how to use the technology for good. A lot of things have been said in terms of acceptance by the public. I think we have a lot of work to do in that respect. And so, again, it will be interesting to see how some of these things do get implemented. I think even in the tech industry at the moment, AI has arrived very quickly, and we don't fully understand how to embed it into human workflows, right? For example, agentic AI is here, can really help some people be a lot faster and produce better quality work. At the same time, it goes at a different speed than normal human workflows. It has different cybersecurity implications. It has safety constraints. And so I think there's a lot of work to do. Again, it's interdisciplinary work to kind of understand how to embed agents with human organizations. And at the end of the day, there are research considerations there, including in, for example, multi-agent systems, negotiations, and so on, as well as, actually trying to implement these things. Finally, I want to say that a very important pillar in the whole picture has to be the development of startups in the AI ecosystem in Canada. This is a place where we have always lagged behind, unfortunately, due to a combination of factors. I think, investment is obviously one. Compute historically has been another sort of drawback. It's hard to grow startups beyond a certain size within the Canadian ecosystem. And unfortunately, that does lead to some of our brightest minds sort of moving away to grow their startups elsewhere. I really hope that the strategy is going to actually help us retain some of our students who are very eager to innovate, who are building interesting, different startups, to keep them here and to keep these startups growing here. I will stop there. I'm happy to talk further later.
Thank you so much, Doina. The startup community is a big one in this space to help us realize some of the ambitious goals that have been provided in the strategy. I'm going to turn to the theme of sovereign infrastructure and intellectual property protection and turn to Mark. The strategy commits to a significant ambition about build out. I wonder, are you able to speak a little bit about the expected timeline? How quickly do you expect this infrastructure to be deployed?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. And I think it's really helpful in this particular zone to recognize that the government has been at this for a while, and actually that it's part of a much longer term, broader effort that we've been underway as we try and position Canada to have the digital public infrastructure and the broader digital infrastructure that's actually required to meet the test of an AI-driven economy and society. So it was actually Budget 2024 that provided the government more than $2 billion to be able to dispense with building out public infrastructure and supports for overall digital compute. And we really try and make sure that that's cut across the entirety of the continuum. So it starts with our Compute Access Fund, which was $300 million deployed to help support small and medium-sized enterprises with their commercialization and adoption journeys, giving them incentivized compute to be able to ensure that their compute was not going to be the limiting factor in helping get new products and new capabilities to market. And that program has already proven extraordinarily successful, and it's why the strategy commits to more than doubling that program by adding $700 million more to the Compute Access Fund to help an increasing number of small and medium-sized enterprises overcome the compute challenges to be able to commercialize and fuel adoption. And we then have the Compute Challenge. The Compute Challenge program was aimed at helping significant parts of our overall infrastructure ecosystem, and particularly the value chain of ecosystem players that we are trying to anchor and cement here in Canada, to give them the opportunities to be able to grow and provide net new sovereign digital infrastructure opportunities and offerings to particularly the commercial workloads that we know are looking for options. That fund continues and has made a number of good intersections with the overall data sector ecosystem, and we'll continue to see announcements play out as we build out net new sovereign offerings. And a core piece that I know lots of people in your community, Charmaine, are very keen on is the Sovereign Compute Infrastructure Program, which was nearly $1 billion provided for a high top-performing supercomputer for the research community, but also to act as a test bed for industry. And that request for proposals process has closed, and we look forward to a fall announcement on the selected site and operator to be able to provide that infrastructure layer of sovereign compute, building real access to top-notch computing capacities to help fuel the next generation of both ingenuity and discovery, but also acting as a test bed with industry. The piece that also got added into Budget 2025 was our ability to enter into memorandum of understanding with large-scale data center operators and builders. And we've been going through an extensive call-in and call-out process that saw us evaluate and assess more than 160 different data center projects, for which we are now proceeding with a limited number. We are entering into memorandum of understanding as we move them into the next phase and contemplate with the government helping with investment capital, with government as an anchor tenant, and then the patient capital necessary to build digital infrastructure at scale in a sovereign manner. And so this is really where we're trying to build on that overall ecosystem to help fuel net new commercial offerings and give particularly a lot of our larger organizations and corporates real choice and control over the AI workloads and in terms of what they have on offer right now versus what we know is actually required. You'll also just see in the strategy a continued commitment as well to using the government as an anchor tenant, and we continue to build out, as part of the defense industrial strategy in particular, net new digital infrastructure capabilities to be able to meet our needs and to help fuel a government instance that is both sovereign, protected, and secure.
That's terrific, Mark. Really good comments. I know I was in Europe, Germany, France, the Netherlands, and they were all looking to see when will these decisions be made. There's a lot of excitement across there about Canada getting into the game. So it's terrific to see all of this happen. Julian, can you talk a little bit about the Canadian business AI adoption? So there's an increase that's requested here from 12% to 60% by 2034. What are the barriers? What are the barriers that industry faces and as a whole in Canada? What are the barriers that we face in reaching this target?
Well, I think it's a very ambitious target because obviously, if you think about building for the website industry, it took more than 20 years actually to have 60% of Canadian businesses to just have a website. So doing that kind of adoption in just 6 or 7 years, that's very ambitious. It requires actually to have product available, platforms available, because many of the companies that are going at the 60% rate will be SMEs, and SMEs to adopt AI need on-the-shelf product. And these products are not ready yet, specifically in Canada. And so for me, when we talk about adoption, we don't want to miss the real question behind is what kind of solutions the companies will adopt. Will they adopt US-based solution or will they adopt Canadian-based solution? And that's a critical subject. I'm coming from the Yellow Pages industry, and if you come back to the 20 years ago, any plumber in Canada would invest advertising in the Yellow Pages. And so jobs were in Canada, money was in Canada, and taxes were in Canada. Now every plumber is using Google or Facebook. And so the jobs are outside of Canada, the money is outside of Canada, and the tax is outside of Canada. Do we want that for AI? That's a critical question, because it's nice to have adopters and it's critical, and we need to have much more adoption in Canada just for productivity improvement. But what kind of solution these people will use? Because if we don't have a strong ecosystem to provide these solutions, then obviously these adopters will use own foreign-based solution, and obviously taxes, jobs, and wealth will be outside of Canada forever. So the question is a delicate balance, and that's why we think there's still discussion to have this strategy between adoption and creating a strong local ecosystem. Because if you accelerate too much adoption, you have the risk of not having an ecosystem ready to adopt and just a foreign-based solution being adopted. On the other side, obviously, if adoption is too slow, you have an issue because productivity will not grow enough, and most of the companies will be penalized. So there's a kind of a delicate balance there. And we think the goal is very, very ambitious. As an industry, we're a bit concerned about perhaps a bit too ambitious to really have Canadian-born solution being used to leverage this adoption. And that's a critical concern for us.
That's interesting. That is a good balance. It also ties into the whole question about trust and safety issues. So we're going to get into those in a minute. Maybe going to Doina, we heard from Mark about the supercomputers being built and how these are going to serve public and industry-driven innovation. I wonder, you had mentioned in your opening remarks the CIFAR program, the AI Chairs program. And we also heard from Mark that this is going to be expanded from 130 to nearly 200 researchers. Can you emphasize or speak about given the talent war, how critical is the timeline for the public computing infrastructure to anchor this new CIFAR expansion?
Oh, it's absolutely critical because compute is the new currency. This is how AI solutions are built, not just the frontier models, but also solutions in the space of, let's say, AI for science or AI for healthcare. So it is critical to have growing compute and stable compute, and also know-how on how to manage it. And I think in the past, Digital Research Alliance has played a critical role for Canada to have a cloud that was shared by all academics in Canada. It is more difficult now because I think also the infrastructure is becoming more complex, and the needs are becoming more difficult to sustain at a good level, both on the academic side because of what the workflows look like, but also if we're going to have SMEs using this kind of infrastructure, if we're going to have startups using this kind of infrastructure, there's going to need to be more support. So I think one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that it's not just how many chips we buy, but also do we have the folks that are in the IT teams that are supporting this joint infrastructure, that have the knowledge, that are trained, that have the bandwidth, right? Having enough of that personnel is also going to be really critical. And, the AI institutes, the 3 AI institutes in Canada have developed quite a bit of expertise in terms of knowing how to manage this type of infrastructure. So it'd be great to see them involved, both in the way that these systems are built, but also in the way that they are staffed further for being able to go forward.
So that is there's a lot, not just the infrastructure. There's a lot more that needs to be put in place in terms of personnel and talent in order to support the effective use of that infrastructure. And actually, great points there. I would say that it's not just for the researchers, but this is also going to be true for the industry partners and the SMEs and even the entrepreneurs who want to test bed activities. That whole framework of who's going to help on the operating side, that's going to be really important to see an escalation that is rapid rather than slowed down by having everyone have to learn things. So really interested in those points that you've made. I'm going to turn to trust and governance. And this is such an important topic. I have some questions. Melissa talked about this, and I'm going to bring Wyatt into the conversation and then turn it back to Mark at the end. But I would say for any of the panelists during the conversation about trust, if you would like to add remarks, or if you would like to add a question to the fellow panelists, please come forward, because this is a foundation. Without the trust, the governance, and the liability frameworks, no one's going to get anywhere. I'm going to start with Wyatt. So I mentioned in the opening remarks, and I didn't say the source, so let me correct that. I said Canada ranks 42nd out of 47 countries. Forgive me. The source is the 2025 KPMG University of Melbourne Global Trust Study. And it said that we rank 42nd out of 47 countries in public trust of AI systems. And we know that the public sentiment is very deeply split. Some of the conversations that are happening in certain parts of the country about AI, data centers, etc., just brings that to the forefront. Looking at this from a Canadian standpoint, does the strategy's reliance on modifying existing broader frameworks like online safety, privacy laws, do you see that as the effective place for how we can provide these to close the trust deficit? Are there other deep structural risks and demands for accountability that Canadian civil society raised that also need to be addressed? May I ask you to comment on those? And Melissa, I'm going to turn it to you afterwards because of some of the statements you made on privacy and online safety parameters. So first, Wyatt.
Yes, so I think to its credit, the strategy is an important first step. It does, have a number of bills to address a number of the issues Canadians are concerned about. And I thought it was also a sign of good faith that they've already passed the criminalizing deepfakes, sexual deepfakes bill, and the Elections Act, and they've also already introduced the Privacy and the Digital Safety Act bills, which there's a big question around how fast will they go about it. They seem to be willing to move on this, which is good. The devil is going to be in the implementation because it's all very well to have a law saying that, hey, this big company can't do this bad thing. But if the Digital Safety Commission, for example, is underfunded, reacts slowly to events, puts wrist slap fines on big companies instead of actually holding them to account, that's going to confirm to Canadians that government doesn't have their back. Whereas if the Digital Safety Commission and the Privacy Commission have the funding, have the political backing, have the budget to really go after big companies. If Meta makes a big, mistake, or will government hold them to account, fine them, show that there are consequences for misaction, and that's where Canadians will see, okay, yeah, my government is standing up for me. I will trust this technology and my government a little bit more. So it really is more of an implementation thing than it is a legal thing. Although the legal piece is very important, so they can have the tools to actually hold companies to account. On the consultation piece, I thought it was, again, better than nothing that we had a consultation back in October, and it was obviously very narrowly focused on the economic side of things, and most Canadians didn't really resonate with the questions about how to improve our talent pipeline and which investments to make. However, what the consultation did show is the scale of interest Canadians have in this. The 11,000 submissions shows that Canadians do care about this, want to be involved. And there's a people consultation on AI that followed it in the spring, really showing that there is Canadians want to be part of this conversation, and the more you can involve them, the better. And this is something at AIGS we've been calling for years now, which is a meaningful, wide-scale national conversation on AI, a two-way conversation where you're explaining where AI is headed, the kind of impacts it can have, and meaningfully asking people, okay, so what kind of features do we want to create with this? If we can automate all work, should we? Do we prefer automated government, or do you prefer government run by human civil servants? All these big questions that are coming down the line with advanced technology are things we need to start asking right now. And if we want Canadians to trust the technology, they need to be part of the conversation right from the start.
Thank you. There is a question about trust, AI, and ethics that I may come back to you at the end that has been posed in the chat line. Going to Melissa, you talked about modernizing privacy and online safety parameters to support public confidence. A persistent challenge in digital governance is whether public institutions have the actual technical capacity to independently evaluate powerful algorithms. From your perspective on algorithmic transparency and bias is something that you also talked about, and I actually talked about deliberately inserting misinformation. Do you think the strategy goes far enough to enable true independent auditing of complex AI systems? Or are we reliant on self-policing or corporate disclosures by the AI industry? Could you comment on some of these thoughts?
Sure. Well, first of all, beyond rebuilding public confidence, I hope that the main goal was to safeguard democracy, which in turn rightfully reassures citizens. But let's keep in mind that it's a strategy, so it's a vision coupled with quote-unquote pledges to invest and financially support this technological transition towards national development and adoption of AI systems. And a strategy is not enough and will never be enough to operationalize a vision. But fortunately, there are existing tools and frameworks that exist so that that vision can actually come to life. And specifically, I think about the UNESCO recommendations on AI ethics, for instance. Canada is a signatory. And it promotes values such as transparency, explainability, fairness, non-discrimination, right to privacy, accountability, and I think I'm forgetting two. But all of these values, those principles are great. But it kind of reflects like what we have in the strategy as well. But we may respectfully and rightfully ask, but how? And what the UNESCO did to actually enable governments to be able to operationalize those values is that they put together the ethical impact assessment tool to guide procedural assessments of AI systems with hundreds of questions you can choose from to better fit your reality. So to give you an example, if you want to assess potential algorithmic biases, you can ask if the AI system was tested on different socio-demographic groups, which ones. If you want to assess data privacy risks, you can ask if you're processing personal data, is the data anonymized, yes or no? So I think we don't have to reinvent the wheel when Canada already is a signatory of the UNESCO recommendations on AI ethics, when tools are freely accessible through the UNESCO to operationalize these values that actually reflect the goals of our national strategy. And of course, it will be much easier for big companies to implement and have a team that is dedicated to conformity and much harder for SMEs. But since the government is willing to heavily invest in that sector, I think there should be definitely a stream that is dedicated to making sure that SMEs are able to comply. And so following this logic, yes, we have tools to align with the strategy, but of course, there need to be training and heavy investment, again, on public and independent auditors as well. The question of auditing specifically is absolutely critical. If we take a region like the EU that is so advanced in terms of regulatory frameworks, well, you will see that the people holding tech companies that don't comply with the GDPR or the ERA Act very often are civil society organizations operating on a very low budget, and they bring the issue up to the data protection officer of their country. So even if the enforcement of regulations has its limits, at the end of the day, AI for all, and in a democratic context, it will always be a collective effort. That's why I also strongly believe that the federal government should also invest more in civil society organizations for them to have more means actually to help the enforcement of upcoming laws and this strategy, whether it be privacy focused or AI focused.
Those are really good comments. I mean, many of our companies are also multinational. And so it'll be interesting to see how these regulations traverse boundaries, and how they are implemented across the Atlantic, for example. I really like your comments about using tools that are already available and have already been vetted. And then the auditing elements of it give us a little bit of teeth in making sure that things do fall into place for Canada. I think the audience would find it a little bit more interesting to delve deeper into auditing and regulations, but I'm going to move to Mark. So, there are dual concerns here that have been expressed regarding trust deficits and technical capacity. The strategy that has been developed talks about moving from reliance to resilience, among other things. Spearheading multinational sovereignty technology alliance with Germany to coordinate safety evaluation benchmarks. We've just heard from Melissa about auditing and regulatory, just to ensure that we have good values embedded in AI systems. I wonder, can you talk about how Canada is going to leverage the international alliance to scale our domestic technical auditing capacity? Do we intend to? And how do you align these strict compliance goals with domestic legislation? And I think those who are working on accelerating AI would also want to understand, how do we not choke the commercial agility for startups who are trying to scale globally? This is a tough question. There's so many counterpieces to it, but love to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I think there's probably a few things I want to make sure I address. So I think Canada is very much seeking to ensure that we provide responsible, safe, and secure artificial intelligence, and that we also, though, do so in a way that fuels innovation and interoperability. I think we are aiming to do that in a number of core ways. So first of all, as has already been noted, there's the I guess four-legged stool in some ways of some of the initial statutory or legislative responses to ensuring we have a foundation of safety, security, and trust. So by modernizing our more than 25-year-old private sector privacy laws and ensuring that there's effective enforcement and new tools available to Canadians to be able to ensure that they can actually protect their privacy effectively, I think that's an important critical aspect, as is safe social media. So ensuring that platforms have duties of responsibility and have duties of care, particularly as it relates to minors, but not just, and extending that over to AI chatbots to ensure that there's mechanisms in place for the responsible and careful use of those tools, particularly as it relates to minors. The ending of the transmission and the criminalization of the transmission of sexually explicit unconsented sexual imagery, and then ensuring our Elections Act actually has provisions to prevent against some of the most heinous uses of both deepfakes and the usage of information and misinformation that gets at the heart of democratic integrity. There's also important work that's underway on a sectoral basis. So ensuring that whether or not it's in financial services or in healthcare or in transportation, that there are effective updates to regulations to ensure that they take into account the considerations of artificial intelligence systems and tools, and that there's appropriate measures in place to maintain safety and protections as we continue to see sector-specific examples that aren't best suited towards a generalized AI approach, but that can build on top of foundations of privacy while allowing for sector-specific efforts. And then there's the international piece that I think is really, really critical. So Melissa raised the UNESCO tool that's available, and I would add the Hiroshima AI Code of Conduct that came out of the G7 process, including the updates to the actual reporting framework against that Code of Conduct that similarly allow for organizations signing on to the Code of Conduct to be able to have very particular benchmarks against which they can help assess their own understanding of the degree to which they're providing safety and protections for the citizens they serve. I'd also note that in many of these cases, our own domestic laws have international correlations to them. So Canada has been deemed adequate under the General Data Protection Regulations for some time, and in fact, we received our adequacy just over a year ago. In part in light because of some of the changes we are pursuing for modernization. But it is worth noting that the Europeans have themselves had to reconsider some of their own fundamental approaches to both GDPR and the EU AI Act, and that they've been thinking through how to potentially make sure that they can be calibrated in such a way as to support small and medium-sized enterprises, many of whom were disproportionately affected by administrative burden in the light of the early onset of both the EU AI Act and GDPR. And so I think we are very much working within those contexts. And it's why things like certification standards and codes, and Melissa raises good points about the notion that they need to be calibrated such that it's not just the most wealthy or the most significantly resourced that can access those. It's one of the reasons why we actually set out a certification mechanism that we hope will cover small and medium-sized enterprises who don't have the benefit of a chief privacy officer or a chief data officer to ensure that they can actually provide services with confidence to Canadians. And then there's the actual work of creating safe and responsible AI optionality, and that's really what's at the heart of our Sovereign Technology Alliance. Canada's commitment to working with Germany is predicated on the notion that we can build some of the elements of a sovereign tech stack that actually can be an alternative for many of our own corporates, but also for governments themselves. And it's not surprising that at a good foundation layer of that is our own Canadian-based LLM that now has a European footprint and has the capacity for some of the most secure on-prem, air-gapped instances of AI that allow for some of that security to actually take shape. And then when we look at the trade opportunities for those types of kind of adopting companies, and Julien is on the line. I don't know if he's still in Paris at the moment, but he certainly was last week at VivaTech, bringing Canadian capabilities to a very hungry global market that is seeking alternatives and optionality. And I think this is where Canada actually can continue to provide safe and responsible choice making to both commercial and government actors. And so I think that's really the kind of overall approach we're trying to bring to actually operationalizing what does safe and responsible AI mean in practice.
Mark, I think I heard in your comments there that there will be likely, or you're thinking about a national office to help SMEs and others navigate the privacy laws and regulations. Is that what I heard from you?
We're looking at and one of the things that PIPEDA modernization, what the Protecting Privacy and Consumer Data Act does is allow for certification schemes to be overseen and essentially certified by the regulator. We had always envisioned, even in previous instances, but certainly do now, a certification mechanism specific to small and medium-sized enterprises, allowing them to be able to comply with privacy obligations in a way that is actually consistent with their current level of resource and administrative burden. And so that's certainly one of the ways in which we're just trying to make sure that SMEs can actually meet the test of privacy in a modern age.
Well, that's really helpful. We're going to have to educate the public on being able to critically assess certifications then as they start to use products. So, keeping the public also engaged on what these processes really mean, I think is going to be really important. Really nice discussion on trust. And my next question is about the Pillar 2 strategy, which says that empowering Canadians, the government plans to deliver free AI literacy training to 1 million entry-level post-secondary students and double K-12 teacher training to over 3,000 educators. We first have to have the trust in place, I would say, before any of this can happen in the schools. But from an educational standpoint, could we hear about how you think we can successfully develop national AI competency curriculum? And then I think this might be best placed with Melissa and Doina. So maybe Melissa first.
Sure. Well, I think that the issue is deeper than just providing adequate AI literacy training, because AI is a multidisciplinary, intersectional, cross-sectoral issue that we need to think about critically, as you said, Sherman. But when we look at the regular literacy level across provinces, it's alarmingly low. If I take the example of Quebec, almost half of Quebecers have a reading comprehension level of secondary 5 or under. That's a 16 years old. So what we want ideally is not to tell people what to think about AI systems, but how to critically think about them. And you can do that if you have your regular literacy level that is so low. So I think that under these issues lie a deeper problem of quality and access to education, which is not my field. But under this pillar, libraries are also mentioned as places to deploy those AI literacy programs. So they are described as long trusted hubs for learning, which is an interesting move considering that there were massive budget cuts earlier this year actually for Library and Archives Canada. But this also tells us that the delegation of AI literacy programs will be important, with the possibility to be community-led programs, which I think is very positive because it removes the question of, okay, is this AI training actually reflecting the reality of people like living it? For the standardization part of your question, there are various approaches to teaching and learning, but I really think that critical scholars, technical scholars, and learning specialists must collaborate. It must be really like interdisciplinary, to develop a curriculum that encompasses the complexity of AI in society and everything that it engenders. And of course, consult Indigenous leaders, minorities, civil society organizations to bring nuances by also covering the different realities AI systems bring to life. So the bottom line is the curriculum and material should be developed with a multidisciplinary approach. I really think this should be community-led, and this should also be dynamic. The strategy is meant to be dynamic. So if an educator sees that the training material does not reflect their reality, I really think there should be like a mechanism to escalate, discuss, and update the material. So I'm thinking an online platform for educators to rely on with online support would be a really good start.
That's really good. Opening remarks, very good too, on the fact that we have problems with literacy just generally. Doina, would you like to add to those remarks?
Yeah, from the point of view of post-secondary education, I think it's a really interesting time because AI methodology has gotten really advanced really quickly. And so a lot of students in higher education just use the tools that are available to them in ways that we don't fully understand or necessarily endorse in the university system. And so it's really important for universities to actually take the time and think through, these tools are here to stay. That's pretty clear. Students want to use them, but having the space and the time to actually think, how do we incorporate them in the pedagogical process in a way where they are not detracting from learning, where they're not just, doing the students' homework, but they're actually helping us, with concepts, with making the students understand concepts better, maybe with personalizing education a little bit more. And the main difficulty right now is that a lot of university professors are actually super overworked. And a lot of this, the sort of normal tenure track system emphasizes research over teaching. So then the burden falls to a relatively small number of teaching faculty to try and figure out this stuff. And of course, education in general is the purview of the provinces. And so there's big discrepancies in terms of how much, financial capabilities the universities actually have to support these types of efforts. So I think it is really important to make sure that there is at the national level support for community of practice, support for exchanging ideas on how to use these tools pedagogically in a good way at all levels of education. And also there is a lot of opportunity to do specific training programs that target specific subcommunities. So, we've had this AI for Good Lab, for example, that specifically targets women and gender minorities. We're in our 10th year now offering it. It's a relatively small program, but it helps people from gender minorities learn about AI and become more familiar with it. I think there's a lot more opportunity to target specific subcommunities and do something that is actually meaningful to them and target the education program to their needs and to their background and meet them a little bit more where they're at.
So Doina and Melissa, I think the audience is going to be so terrifically pleased to hear that there's some already great thought happening with regards curriculum development. We've heard a lot about, being very careful that AI actually makes us smarter and not the opposite. Makes students learn better and not the opposite. I don't want to use the word dumber or slower. So I'm just saying the opposite here. So having that thought process as to what kind of curriculum needs to be developed to make sure that that happens, I think all of us in the audience are very happy to hear that that work is already in play. I'm going to turn to Julian because there were a lot of responses from the consultation that raised concerns about job security and worker protection. And in fact, in any community where a data center is being built, this comes up over and over again. So the strategy anticipates some large number of jobs through AI adoption. Can you tell us a little bit about this tension? And, are there upskilling pathways? What upskilling pathways exist for mid-career workers, for frontline laborers, all of these individuals whose roles are the most vulnerable to displacement? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, obviously, that's a very complex question, and not everybody has the same answer to that. The thing I can say is, first of all, there are multiple AIs, multiple types of AI with very different implications. The problem right now is everybody's thinking LLMs equals AI, which is partially true, but not totally true. And so that's true that LLMs are fully disrupting some of the content professions, I would say, content sectors. So if you think about marketing sector, the consulting sector, the legal sector, LLM is heavily disrupting because LLM can do a job an intern would do. And so there's a critical question for young people about working in more content-driven missions, how to access this new market and this new job market. Because for them, in fairness, interns can be replaced by machines at one point. So that's a critical question and a real concern for all these firms because they know they need to train people before raising to more senior positions. So how they will do that? So LLMs is raising specific questions. But if you think about AI in industry, typically, that's very, very different question. Meaning, if you think about Canada and Quebec, companies are missing people. Meaning they just don't find the competency they need. And so AI is much more a tool that help optimize the existing resources and not cutting any jobs. Meaning, from a scale AI perspective, we had funded more than 300 AI adoption projects. None of them had any job destruction. Why? Because the projects were really made to help companies do more with the resources they have. For example, we have funded a project for Urgence Santé, the ambulances in Quebec. Well, basically, Urgence Santé has not enough drivers, as is not able to find enough drivers. So they use AI to better predict where the demand could be and to better allocate their drivers. So it's a good way to use the existing people they have to really give a better service. You can multiply the example, Port of Montreal, exactly the same issue, Gruget, exactly the same issue. So there are multiple examples where basically companies out in Canada are missing people, and AI is a tool to optimize that. We have to remind that for the first time, Quebec population has decreased in absolute terms despite immigration. Canada population is not far enough, and you saw countries like Japan or others having exactly the same issue. So the real impact on AI, at least in industry, is also to be looked upon the global impacts on demography, immigration policies, and other to really assess what will be at the end of the day real impact. So in all of that discussion, looking at different type of AI is a good way of looking at that, meaning some questions are raised by LLMs, and we should definitely look at that, develop the right competencies for the people. We can talk about also about coders in India or all the people that are coding right now in Bangalore. Of course, their job is going to face huge issues because of the new tools. So that's true, but some other sectors, not even talking about the more physical sectors, the use of AI is not exactly raising the same question linked to demography. So that's on my side, it's a very complex discussion.
Mm-hmm. It is. I mean, we've heard in regions where data centers are being built, the public in those regions being very concerned about the use of resources, power, water, and yet no jobs being created. In fact, jobs been taken away. So I think that this is going to be a really important issue for Canada to face and grapple with. I wonder
If I may just on that, because also resources, that's the same. Resources, power, and energy, that's mainly for LLMs. That's not for all AI. So again, we need to have a very different. So traditional AI in industry doesn't require the same computing power, the same water, the same energy than LLM are using. So again, let's be careful to de-average what we say about AI in that case.
Terrific. Mark, may I go back to you and just give us a few talking points about skills and literacy. That's a very important part of the strategy. Can you tell us why the government made that an important part of the strategy? I think all of us agree, but it'd be very nice to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think the premise of why it was so critical was a fewfold. So one, I think there's a very strong belief that you actually need to engage with and work with artificial intelligence in order to be able to up your own trust and skill and confidence in the actual technology. And in order to do that, you need foundational skills to be able to do that. And it's premised on the notion that part of what we need to do to fuel adoption is actually fuel trustworthy options, and then also the literacy and the skills to be able to engage with them. I think the second is that there's an underlying premise of the strategy as well about where productivity gains and economic lift and some of the capacities to actually move the Canadian economy and the Canadian ecosystem forward lie, and that's in the mass diffusion of this technology in safe and responsible ways. And I think if you kind of think about that, it means that there's a very small number of companies and countries that are pursuing artificial general intelligence at the level of the frontier. There's an even smaller, there's a slightly larger number of folks who are going to be AI native applications or model companies that are pursuing kind of real opportunities to be able to kind of underpin new capabilities in artificial intelligence. Where the real juice is in the actual diffusion of the applications and the capabilities across the entirety of the economy. And you're not going to get significant productivity gain or lift by just having a few hundred companies that kind of are AI native and AI by origin. You're going to need to actually start to see that propulsion of the capability across the full sort of sectors and capabilities of the economy. And that means you need mass skilling alongside mass diffusion because you actually need a capable kind of population. And the other is that the most relevant answer to kind of to the displacement question is by ensuring that Canadians actually have the skills to be able to advance in an increasingly AI augmented workforce. There's a sad kind of fallback, which is Canada's adopting at such a low rate that we're unlikely to face kind of significant displacement. But I think that's false hope. I think we have to actually anticipate that we can fuel real safe and responsible adoption, and therefore we need to be providing the skills and the capacities and the capabilities to be able to do so. And as per the previous answers, we're thankfully not starting from scratch. We have extraordinary efforts with great curricula, great programs, a number of good community organizations out there that have done a significant amount of work in this space. Obviously, lots of this was premised on the really important work that Amy, our institute in Edmonton, has done. They have plans to reach 125,000 post-secondary education students this year alone with their foundational course. They have sector-specific interventions in things like early childhood education and in nursing, working with community colleges, polytechnics, and institutes alongside other post-secondary education institutions to really get the kind of sector-specific skills that actually allow for AI augmentation alongside human capacity. And so I think that's why it was so critical. Is it's really about what we see as how you get to AI for all is actually ensuring that there's a capability across the entirety of the society.
Great comments, Mark. And I also see this as bringing the ecosystem together in Canada a lot more tightly. Universities, colleges, industry, all the partners that need to come together to play. Melissa and Doina, I really liked all the focus on critical thinking as part of the curriculum. That is just terrific. I'm going to do a free-for-all here because we're running out of time, and I would like to ask this last question about the healthcare system. I think it was Mel. Mel, you brought some of those comments up. So, we know that the path from AI academic breakthrough to real deployment in Canada stalls because there's no force that connects innovators, industries, and institutions around the problems that matter most. One of these is the health sector. So there's a newly announced 200 million AI missions program for healthcare. And I wonder if I can get some thoughts on, is this going to successfully bridge the gap and the connectivity that's needed? Love to hear from the industry lens, the civil society lens, and then finally the government lens. Who would like to start? Maybe the industry side? Yeah, Julian, you and Wyatt.
Sure. So from the industry, meaning we hope, we don't know yet what's inside this AI mission, but for sure there's a lot to do in the health sector. And again, we need to de-average what we say. So health is not only about drug discovery, it's a very important thing, but it's also very basically improve logistics for hospital, logistics for emergency rooms, logistics for surgery. And there's a lot to do, meaning I've been at the hospital 6 months ago and still working with faxes. So I mean, there's a lot to do in the health sector to improve productivity, and AI can really help around logistics, can really help about people organization, can really help about drug inventory and a lot of that. So meaning it will really depend to help industry how this AI for health mission will be shared between different priorities. But for sure, if we look at what industry can do for health, there's a lot of processes in the health sector that can be definitely improved by AI for the betterment of Canadian population, for sure.
Wyatt, you wanted to chip in?
Absolutely. And one of the big things too is to keep in mind the speed at which the technology is developing. I mean, we're seeing the nature of the technology fundamentally change in a period of 6 months. So if an AI mission is a multi-year project that takes 2 or 3 years to implement, by the time the 2 or 3 year mark comes, we're in a very different AI world than we are right now. And by then, will the tools have changed so much to need to do a different system? So there's a real race against time here to be able to harness these tools fast enough to make them useful before the next generation comes along. And that's something we'll be tracking also, not just for the AI missions, but also for our legislation will be implemented fast enough, will be future-proof, because what we're seeing right now is just is toddler AI, it's a very basic beginner AI. What's coming next, with superintelligence is much, much more powerful.
Mel, you have some concerns. Yeah, love to hear your thoughts.
So I hear the logistics point made by Julien. Definitely, if it's hyper specialized for logistics, for I don't know, I don't have the vocabulary for doctor stuff, but like tools to operate in the operation room and stuff like that. For supply chain, why not? But generally speaking, as I said in the introduction, to me, this is reckless. I don't want to see the mass deployment of AI systems that are not hyper specialized, and also before adequate guardrails are put in place through regulations and audits that are scheduled. Because let's keep in mind that AI in healthcare, it doesn't have users, but targets. So I think we should slow down before we also mass harvest and share patients' data for startup founders to exploit. When it comes to collecting patients' data, it really shocked me, and I said it in the introduction, that was the red flag that I identified in the strategy to provide AI startups with. So entrepreneurs, the private sector, for me, that's a big no, absolutely not, and especially not without patients' consent, first of all. And even if consent is in place, I suspect that minorities like myself will simply refuse to share their personal health data to third parties in the name of innovation, especially when we know that the entrepreneurship space is mostly very not diverse. Statistically, sorry, it's white men coming from the upper classes whose priority is profit, and to each its own. I don't put a value statement on that. And because we are minorities, or even some people who are not racial minorities, gender minorities, who just have rare illnesses, will likely be excluded from the data set, not to skew it, and will be the most negatively impacted by those systems. So at the end of the day, it automates systemic discriminations. So to me, and that's not in health, just like generally speaking, if an AI system socially moves us backwards, this is not innovation. And on top of that, and I said it in the intro, and I want to reiterate, it will not solve the issue of understaffed hospitals. I have never been to a fully normally staffed hospital in Canada, and I've been in 3 provinces. I'm very unlucky. The only time I went to a hospital that was correctly staffed was in Taiwan, and it shocked me that there were enough people, and I spent only 20 minutes in the emergency waiting room, which is insane for Canadians. So, and the example that was given in strategy, an AI system can alert staff if patient health deteriorates. In theory, again, this is great, but if there is not enough staff, the outcome is going to remain the same. And my last point, because we're running out of time, is auditing. I really think that for systems that are high risk, such as the ones deployed in healthcare, because they have a significant impact on somebody's access to health and just life, they should be audited at least every 3 months, not every year like it's kind of the norm. And I'm not even comfortable having that kind of systems audited only every 3 months. So yeah.
Great remarks and very, very strong echo to your opening. Doina, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to go into the questions from the audience now. There's going to be a poll put up for the audience members on demographics by CSPC. I'm not sure if it's up yet or if it's going up, but there's a demographic poll that is going to be very helpful to them in their funding and other understanding who the people that they serve are. So I'm encouraging you all to complete the demographic poll. I'm going to put a question on the table, and if one or two of you feel that you'd be willing to take a stab at it, that would be great. To what extent do you believe Canada's focus on building trustworthy AI can realistically convince local buyers to choose domestic students over competitors? And actually, it was specifically stated dominant US competitors. Thoughts? Julian, you raised your eyebrow, so you get to be on the floor.
Yeah, because that's our job, you know. At the end of the day, that's what we try to do. I mean, I don't know if the trustworthy piece. I hope trustworthy would be a good argument to choose Canadian. I'm afraid we need to be a bit more money on the table to have that. So trustworthy is definitely something we need, but you know, we talk a lot about adoption, the adoption program under Pillar 3 the government has put in place. That's why we strongly advocate that the Buy Canadian clause should be linked to this adoption money, in the sense that if we help companies adopt AI, we should have a Buy Canadian clause saying, well, we'll give you money to help you adopt AI if you use Canadian-born solution, which is, by the way, the best way to have trustworthy situation. So I would a bit reverse the argument, which is focus on, if we have to subsidize adoption, let's do a lead for Canadian-based solution, and then obviously and be sure that these Canadian-based solutions are much more trustworthy and trust by design than any other solution outside of Canada.
Mark.
Yeah, I think it's the premise of the question is an important one, you know, and I think there is a tendency to think that, you know, what we might be able to produce as a small trading nation is, you know, the lot of AI, and that we'll suddenly be sticking folks with a weak alternative as opposed to an actual dominant opportunity. I think we're already proving that there is a real hunger for autonomy and for choice making in this space. You know, the foundation model that Canada has been able to help produce, one of only 4 countries in the world with one, is now, you know, the privileged provider to one of our largest banks and one of our largest telecommunications companies, who had options and who made the choice to be able to prove and to go with a more responsible, more sovereign, more secure option. And I think we need to make sure that that choice is available across more domains of artificial intelligence. And I do think that when that choice is available, at scale with real capacity and competency, and where a secure alternative is actually, particularly in the face of the most recent kind of geopolitical changes that we've seen over the last number of weeks in this space, I think it is actually it is realistic and credible that we actually can do that. And I think the method of kind of build, partner, buy, which is when we can build it and scale it, we should. When we can do it with partners, also great, which is where our Sovereign Technology Alliance plays in. And then if we have to buy it, if that's literally the only alternative, how do we make sure that it's safe and responsible when we do?
That's good. I'm going to do one more question, and then there's a comment that I think would be particularly applicable for you to hear, Mark, but everyone else as well. So the last question that I'll pose is probably best for Mel and Doina, but anyone. To what extent could lack of trust in AI be a good thing if it is well informed? Wouldn't we like people to have a critical and nuanced idea of the strengths and especially limits of AI as a good basis for AI literacy? How can we build on that? So just a couple brief remarks on that from anyone who wants to take it up.
I totally agree with that. It is important to be not just blindingly trusting, but to be informed and to understand the trade-offs and to understand when systems are believable and when they're not believable, and to always use a critical lens. And I think this is why it's very important to build these skills into the curriculum when we train people, regardless of their level. Having this ability to do critical thinking rather than just trusting the tool is super important.
Yeah, that sure come out a lot in this conversation. Thank you, Doina. So, Mark, there's a comment here that says, tremendous conversation. Kudos to all of you, by the way, for that. More a comment than a question. The strategies focus on building sovereign compute infrastructure and establishing trusted partnerships aligns with responsible, ethical identity networks where users own and control their own data. So the crux of it is that embedding the individual and their community directly into this AI for all framework is going to provide a practical implementation of Canada's national goals, securely positioning local communities as the critical human-in-the-loop counterweight to rapidly mutating AI technologies. Basically making sure that there is all the right partners are at the table when this work is being developed. And Mark, I think maybe you're building these ecosystems. Maybe you want to put a final comment on that one.
Just to say that I think engagement was critical in the shaping of the strategy, and it will continue to be a critical factor in its implementation and execution. I think we absolutely are trying to truly live out AI for all, and that means that we are going to need to find mechanisms for engagement, continued connection, and for building partnerships. And I think I wholeheartedly agree.
That's terrific. So I'll just offer some closing remarks to say thank you very much to the panelists. This is a really important discussion on, well, AI sovereignty, workforce transformation. Julian, you spoke a lot about that. Lifelong learning, preparing Canadians for an enabled AI future. Wyatt, Mel, and Doina. Thank you so much, Mark. It was terrific to have you here for this discussion, and I'll turn it over to Mehrdad for his final remarks.
Thank you so very much, Charmaine, and all the panelists. That was really fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed that. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for your insights and perspectives from different angles. That was a very rich conversation and discussion. And I want to bring to the attention of the audience, first of all, thank you for your patience and good questions, but also pay attention to the upcoming events that will take place in the next couple of weeks. The June 22nd, we'll have a panel. June 29th, my apologies, is on dementia and prevention in Canada, organized by CABI. And the next set of AI-related conversations, July 6th and July 21st, they are all posted on our website. Please take a look. Look forward to see you at those A reminder that the 18th Science and Innovation Policy Conference taking place in November 25 to 27. The registration just opened last week. The super saver rate is on now until the end of summer, significant saving. And finally, the AI Summit. We added 1 day of AI Summit due to the tremendous great proposals that we received for the conference. We added 1 day of the AI Summit the day before the conference on November 24th. And just please check all the updates on our website. Once again, I want to thank you all, the participants, the panelists. Charmaine, thank you for the moderation. Very much looking forward to see you all in future events. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.